It's 2022 now. You cannot refer yourself out of immunotherapy. You're going to be out of business, right? We're all doing immunotherapy in different facets.
That's Dr. Sigrun Hallmeyer, Medical Director of the Cancer Service Line at Advocate Lutheran General Hospital. She'll be back later in the show. Welcome to Cancer Buzz. I'm your host, Summer Johnson. On this show, we work to highlight the latest news and trends in cancer care you need to know. Today, we're examining tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte cell therapy, or TIL cell therapy, and what it might mean for the community cancer provider. Dr. Mark Ferries is co-director of the melanoma program and head of surgical oncology at the Angeles Clinic and Research Institute. He's also on the executive committee for the ACCC Immuno-Oncology Institute.
For adoptive T-cell tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte therapies, those are not yet approved. They are still in the clinical trial phase, but there is sort of a larger movement of cell therapies in oncology that this is a part of. And some of those therapies are approved. For example, the CAR T-cell therapies that are approved for hematologic malignancies. They are available into the community at specialized centers. Adoptive immunotherapy with tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes, say for melanoma or other tumor types, are still in the clinical trial stage. There have been some very encouraging trial results that have been presented and published, but not yet approved.
Give us a timeline, if you would, of the development of T-cell therapies.
TIL therapy actually predates CAR T therapy. There's been a long-standing interest in using tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes as an immunotherapy for melanoma and other malignancies. It actually dates back to the 1980s when Steven Rosenberg at the National Cancer Institute was working on these treatment modalities. And the basic concept is that you can use cells, lymphocytes that have already declared themselves as anti-tumor lymphocytes by being able to infiltrate into the tumors themselves. And although they have not been able to successfully kill those tumors, the idea behind TIL therapy is to take the tumor out and to isolate and support the growth of the lymphocytes that have infiltrated, reproduce those cells into large numbers, and then give the cells back to the patients who need them, to the same patient from which they came.
Why has it been so many years to get to this point?
It was a very challenging therapy to actually produce. And for many years, it was thought it could never be done outside of the NCI. And that group produced a number of refinements and improvements in the treatment, and it became more effective and garnered more interest. And so now it is coming along to the point where it is becoming more widely available in clinical trials anyway.
What are the differences between CAR T and TIL cell therapy?
CAR T therapy came along well into that process. And to some extent, it was a concept that was developed to try to overcome some of the difficulties, the technical difficulties with tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes. The idea with CAR T cells is those are genetically manipulated cells. So you've taken lymphocytes from patients with cancer and you've modified them in the laboratory. And so these are not necessarily, when they come out of the patient, they're not tumor specific, but they have genes inserted so that they produce antigen receptors on their surface that are specific for tumor antigens. And then those cells that have been sort of turned into these anti-cancer cells are given back to patients in a similar way to the way the adoptive transfer works for TIL. But those only work when you have a well-defined tumor antigen that is something that can be very effectively targeted, but is safe to target. So that has worked for these hematologic malignancies. That has been a real challenge in solid tumors, finding that antigen that is specific enough to the tumor that CAR Ts can be used for it. The advantage of TIL is that the patient has determined, their immune system has figured out what antigens are important, what antigens are good targets, and we just take advantage of that by isolating those cells that are anti-tumor cells.
Dr. Ferries, you work primarily with melanoma patients, and we've covered that here, but T-cell therapy is showing promise for more types of cancer, right?
Well, I think it's the same group of therapies for which immunotherapy in general has been looked at. Melanoma is the lead, and that's because melanoma has been investigated for TIL for a long time. So we know a lot about it, and we know that there are good lymphocytes, good therapeutic lymphocytes that can be isolated from those tumors. Other immunogenic tumors, such as head and neck squamous carcinomas, cervical cancer, triple negative breast cancer, and potentially cancers from tumors that have mismatch repair defects. Those all have good lymphocytic infiltrates. We know they have high numbers of neoantigens that may be targets for the immune system. So I think those may be prime candidates for the next generation. Lung cancer is obviously the most deadly cancer and also potentially has important tumor-specific lymphocytes that are in those tumors. So I think that'll be another area of interest for developing these therapies and expanding access to other tumors besides melanoma.
There was a learning curve with the approval of the first immune checkpoint inhibitor, particularly with adverse effects and educating patients and the multidisciplinary staff on what to look for. Do you think there's going to be something similar with TIL cell therapy?
I think so. I think there have been certainly some lessons learned, and groups have become more comfortable with cell therapies that have done CAR T. But the challenges with TIL are just a bit different from the administration perspective. At least at the moment, these TIL therapies are still given with interleukin 2 as a support for the cells after they've been infused. It's not entirely clear whether that'll be able to be pared back to lower doses or eliminated altogether as the technology develops. But at the moment, it requires this cytokine therapy. That's a challenging thing for some places to give. It requires a certain amount of familiarity with what the toxicity of interleukin 2 is. IL-2 is still an approved therapy for melanoma, but rarely used in the current era. But it does require a certain amount of expertise in dealing with the side effects. They're much more acute side effects with IL-2 compared to checkpoint inhibitors, which are things that are often delayed.
What are those side effects that we're seeing in clinical trials?
With IL-2, it's similar to sort of a cytokine release syndrome that you'll see in some treatment models, but it's hypotension, it's renal dysfunction. Essentially, the interleukin 2 sets everything on overdrive for those patients, and it's given in high enough doses that you'll see these acute toxicities, and the patients will need to be supported with fluids and other toxicity management. The good thing about TIL, as compared to the old high-dose IL-2 that was given as a standalone therapy for melanoma, is that with TIL, you're not actually trying to push the dose as strongly as you would when the IL-2 itself was a therapy. The IL-2 itself in TIL is given as a support for the cells, so you're not as anxious to really drive those patients with more IL-2 than they can handle. And so it will require a certain amount of, I think, education and training for teams to be ready to give these therapies, but it's been a manageable thing at all the centers that have done IL-2 and have done TIL to this point.
Dr. Steven Rosenberg of the National Cancer Institute said that, quote, TIL cell therapy is one of the most exciting areas of modern research in the cancer arena. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Now, he is perhaps not the most objective reporter on that since it's his baby for many years. But, I think one of the things that has made it so interesting is that we know much more about the immune system. We know much more about these tumor antigens, and we know much more about which cells are effective, which cells may not be as helpful. And so I think that just makes it more and more likely that these therapies, which have demonstrated these great results in patients who are resistant to all the other stuff, they'll become more available to more patients. And so, for example, some things that they've done there at the NCI, they've been able to use molecular technologies that enable sequencing of the tumors, identify the specific antigens that are mutated for an individual patient, and then create a cell product that is specifically designed to address that mutation. And so that's way beyond what we could have imagined would be possible, within even just 10 or 15 years ago. And so I do think that this wellspring of new abilities, new understanding of how tumor immunology works does make this a very exciting thing. I think TIL, as it's being currently tested in the clinical setting is just the tip of the iceberg, and that we will get much better at refining these treatments as they become more widely used.
Our next guest says the oncology community is going to have to come together to connect patients to these groundbreaking therapies. Dr. Sigrun Hallmeyer is an early adopter of immunotherapy and serves as the chair of the ACCC Immuno-Oncology Institute's Executive Committee.
I can tell you that even for myself, I am not a fan of immunology. I went into cancer because I did not want to be a rheumatologist or immunology expert. So the whole idea of having to understand, the T cell receptor and the different interactions and all that kind of stuff often tends to be somewhat scary for oncologists because that's not how we're traditionally trained. And in that, I often find myself when I talk to colleagues saying, my God, I'm so happy that you're doing this whole immunotherapy stuff because this is so far beyond me. And I always say, no, it's not at all. This is really just something that you need to be brave enough to sort of get your feet wet in. Now, times have changed, to be honest with you. Like when I started in immunotherapy and when I traveled all over the country giving lectures on this, it was truly so that people would come to me after my lecture and say, you know what, I'm so happy you're doing this. If I ever have a patient that qualifies for that, I'm going to send them to you. It's 2022 now. You cannot refer yourself out of immunotherapy. You're going to be out of business, right? We're all doing immunotherapy in different facets. But like you said so nicely before, it's a whole big spectrum, right? It's from the immunotherapy that you essentially just take a bottle out of the shelf and infuse it into your patient, all the way to doing cellular therapies, And so, again, I'm not expecting that most physicians in the US will be experts in giving cellular therapy, but I sure hope that most oncologists will be comfortable in understanding just enough of cellular therapy that they recognize the power of this type of therapy and feel comfortable educating their patients about it. And when they do find somebody who's a good candidate for it, that they will actually motivate those patients to travel whatever distance it might be for that person to get to that therapy, to potentially get to a very significant change in outcome, potentially cure.
How long have you been researching immunotherapy?
Pretty much since I have put my foot into the door of oncology. So right out of my residency training. So I trained in the state of Pennsylvania, right out of medical school. I came to this country here, trained in Pennsylvania in internal medicine, and then joined the University of Illinois here in Chicago. And really, my very first research project was, interestingly, with prostate cancer patients, but we did dendritic cell vaccine trials at that time. This was the thing to do. And this is really what sort of excited the whole world of immunotherapy in me, and I was fortunate enough that I joined the practice that I'm with now still, out of fellowship, never changed because I love what I do.
I asked for a reaction on this quote from Dr. Ferries as well. Dr. Stephen Rosenberg of the NCI obviously has a lot of enthusiasm for TIL cell therapy's potential in cancer treatment. What are your thoughts?
I absolutely share his enthusiasm for immunotherapy in general. And it's difficult to sort of call one child your favorite, if you will, right? So, because there's so many different approaches, and CAR T cell therapy is equally exciting. What is exciting to me is that we have really understood how the patient's immune system, or how the human immune system really has capabilities of recognizing and ultimately eradicating malignancies, right? And so, being now old enough where I have been an oncologist where metastatic melanoma was a universally fatal illness, and not just fatal, but 6 months to 8 months median overall survival, rapidly fatal, to now having patients come to me in initial consultation with stage 4 disease, and a good third of those being, I don't want to say cured, but experiencing long-term survival benefit, and some of those patients truly experiencing a curative outcome. And that in a span of a 16-year career, that's how long I've been an oncologist now, is just fascinating. And so TIL therapy, although probably still somewhat on the off side of it, I would not say that this is ready for prime time in terms of it being available at all offices across the United States to oncologists who practice oncology in a setting of immunotherapy. It is certainly going to be a therapy that's going to play a large role for patients who are refractory to our sort of less complicated therapies, so say immune checkpoint inhibitors and other monoclonal antibodies that are certainly currently in the pipeline. But for those, we're still talking about likely at the end of the day, hundreds of thousands of patients who will be candidates for this therapy.
Are we close?
I do want to be honest, at least the way it is currently studied and the way I anticipate the FDA will judge on its approval on that, I don't anticipate that the current products in the TIL cell therapy world are going to be commercially available at all community hospitals. This is probably going to be something that's going to be, at least for some time, limited to large academic centers and centers like mine where we have experience with high-dose interleukin-2, with lymphodepletion, with cellular therapies. If you look at the clinical trials that have been published now in this space, the toxicity is still very, very significant. And so this is where the TIL cell therapy really differentiates itself still very much from other immunotherapeutic interventions. Is really in the world of cellular therapies like CAR T cell therapy. And so again, as much as I would like to say it's here to stay and for everybody to use, it's probably going to be here to stay and for everybody to use by referral.
What does that communication look like, though, in practicality? With clinicians in the community setting, what do research institutions need to do? And then what do the community practitioners need to do to keep themselves up to date and connect their patients?
It's going to take a village for all of us to sort of combine and reach out to patients who might potentially benefit from these set of therapies. And then we in the larger academic centers need to make sure that we have mechanisms in place that make it easy to find us, to contact us, to send patients to us, to communicate with those referring physicians about, the appropriateness of this type of therapy for their patients, et cetera. So very long-winded answer to your question, but I think ultimately, it's going to require the savviness of everybody that sits on that table. And it starts with the referring physician. It starts with the, expert physician. It starts with the company that's, sort of promoting the product. And it does not end with the patient who also needs to be involved in that type of decision making.
What motivates you to keep moving forward?
From my very personal experience as an oncologist, where I have had patients who died of a disease a year ago that can now be cured based on the research that has been done, not just by me, but many, many other researchers and wonderful people that have invested their careers. And it's not even just physicians, it's the patients, right, that sign up for these trials. It's organizations that support them. It's organizations like yours, right, that promote the information. It takes a village for all of this, right? And so what gets me up in the morning is the prospect of expanding that success to one more patient, to 10 more patients, to thousands more patients, right? So the idea that what we're doing every single day, the little bit of one something can make a huge impact down the road for many more patients to come. That's, I think, what really drives me. And, although we've done research probably for thousands of years as humans, right? The acceleration of process of research by understanding the human genome, understanding the human immune system better and better. And there's certainly still so much more that we don't know compared to what we know. But every clinical trial opens a new door, right? It's a new window on, we didn't understand that. Look at this, And so TIL therapy, the tumor infiltrating lymphocyte cellular therapy, is one facet to that whole big potpourri of knowledge that we're gaining in the understanding of how we can manipulate a patient's sort of immunotherapeutic environment in such a way that becomes hostile against their cancer, and in that potentially cure somebody. And that's thrilling to me.
You can check out the show notes for links to resources regarding TIL cell therapy. We know your time is valuable, and we certainly appreciate you spending it with us. Make sure to follow Cancer Buzz on your favorite podcast app so you'll be notified when new issues are published. Don't forget, you can ask Alexa to play the latest Cancer Buzz podcast on your smart speaker, and that way you can listen while you're cooking dinner, folding laundry, or, of course, going to work. From all of us on the Cancer Buzz team, this is Summer Johnson.
Cancer Buzz is a resource of the Association of Community Cancer Centers.